Beneath layers of forgotten earth and roots that have crawled for centuries, there lies a sanctuary that time itself has tried to erase. Its stones are covered with moss, its gates fused shut by age, and yet those who stumble near it speak of an atmosphere heavy, as if the air itself resists being breathed. Legends whispered by wandering tribes say it was not built by mortals alone, but forged through a covenant between gods and men, a covenant so sacred and so perilous that when it was broken, the heavens themselves demanded it be sealed forever. No one remembers exactly when the gates were locked, only that it was done not by human hands, but by forces beyond comprehension, forces that left marks scorched into the rock like lightning frozen in stone. Those who approached it in distant times claimed to hear echoes beneath the silence, chants in languages no one has ever spoken, low hums vibrating in the bones, and the sensation of being observed by something unseen. The sanctuary is said to be older than pyramids, older than temples carved into mountains, older even than the stories of empires that thought themselves eternal. It carries with it the smell of forgotten incense and blood sacrifice, though no fire has burned there for millennia. The wind that brushes against its broken pillars seems to whisper not of abandonment, but of watchfulness, as though the place itself waits. But waits for what? That question has haunted generations. To those who lived in its shadow, the sanctuary was not simply ruins. It was a warning. Elders spoke of a pact that men once swore with gods who descended clothed in light and thunder. The pact promised prosperity, wisdom, and power in exchange for obedience and reverence. For a time, men lived in harmony with divine will. But harmony is fragile when desire grows stronger than devotion. Something happened, something that fractured trust, and the gods responded not with forgiveness, but with punishment. The sanctuary became the epicenter of that divine retribution, a scar left open on the earth. What remains most unsettling is not what is seen, but what is felt. Travelers crossing its borders describe visions, dreams that blur into waking life, and voices that seem to rise from the stone itself. Some hear lamentations, others commands. None leave unchanged. And in these visions, one truth repeats itself. This sanctuary was sealed because humanity dared to betray what should never have been broken. The ground remembers the thunder that once fell upon it, the cries of a civilization swallowed by divine anger, and the silence that followed when men were reminded that to challenge gods is to challenge eternity itself. And now, after centuries buried in obscurity, fragments of inscriptions and unearthed relics have begun to whisper the story again. The sanctuary, once silenced, is no longer content with being forgotten. Its gates remain closed, but its secrets have started to bleed into our world, and those secrets tell of a punishment that was never meant to fade. Long before kingdoms drew their borders, before scribes carved their first symbols on clay, there existed a civilization whose memory has almost vanished. They lived where the sanctuary now sleeps, a people who saw the sky not as emptiness, but as a dwelling of beings greater than themselves. Their nights were filled with rituals under constellations that guided their every harvest, their every battle, and their every prayer. The world was younger then, more fragile, and the veil between the mortal and the divine was said to be thin enough to tremble at a whisper. To walk upon the earth was, in their eyes, also to walk upon the reflection of heaven. In that time, gods were not distant figures locked in myth. They were present, descending in forms of brilliance and terror. They came with voices like thunder, their eyes blazing like fire, their hands shaping storms and rivers alike. The people offered sacrifice, not of mere grain or wine, but of their most treasured possessions, sometimes even their own blood, believing it was the only way to remain in balance with such overwhelming power. And for a time their offerings were accepted. The land flourished, rains came when they were needed, and the crops grew as if kissed by light itself. But prosperity often breeds ambition. the civilization began to hunger for more than survival. They wanted mastery. They studied the movements of the stars, built monuments aligned with solstices, and crafted vessels that could carry their voices farther than their lands. The gods, it is said, granted them fragments of wisdom, knowledge that no other mortal nation possessed. This knowledge was both gift and burden. With it, they learned how to carve stone with precision still unmatched, how to draw power from metals buried deep within the earth, and how to heal wounds once thought fatal. Yet with every gift, the temptation grew. What if men could one day rise to the level of gods themselves? The sanctuary was the heart of this exchange. It was there, within walls carved with symbols no scholar today can decipher, that the covenant was sealed. Priests and priestesses, draped in garments woven with gold and dyed in colors that shimmered under starlight, spoke words taught by divine tongues. A pact was made. Humanity would honor the gods with loyalty and humility, and in return, the gods would share their guidance and protection. The sanctuary became a bridge between heaven and earth, a place where mortals could approach divinity without being consumed by it. But the covenant was never meant to be broken. And perhaps, deep within the silence of those halls, the gods foresaw the arrogance that would one day come. The context of this forgotten time is not just history. It is a mirror of humanity's endless struggle with power. To be given more than survival is to be tempted by greatness, and greatness, if unchecked, can fracture even the strongest bonds. What began as harmony would soon unravel into betrayal, and the sanctuary that once shone as a beacon of unity would become the monument of humanity's downfall. Inside the sanctuary, at the very heart of its echoing chambers, the sacred oath was born. It was not a vow whispered in secrecy, but a declaration shouted into the cosmos itself, carved into stone and sealed with blood. The priests, trembling yet resolute, stood as intermediaries between humanity and the divine, their voices carrying promises that would bind generations yet unborn. Torches flickered against walls etched with symbols that glowed faintly, as if ignited by forces invisible to human eyes. The air was heavy with incense, thick with the weight of expectation, and every word spoken was believed to carry the resonance of eternity. The gods had descended not out of benevolence, but out of necessity. They required guardianship, devotion, and obedience, for in return they would deliver prosperity, wisdom, and the strength to endure calamities that no mortal alone could withstand. The oath was mutual. Men pledged their loyalty, while gods pledged their favor. It was an alliance that promised stability, a bond intended to secure the fragile thread between heaven and earth. To those who witnessed it, this covenant was the highest expression of order, an assurance that chaos could be restrained by divine authority and human obedience working together. Yet even as the words echoed through the chamber, there lingered a shadow. The pact demanded not only faith but sacrifice. Families offered their firstborn animals, their harvests, and in rare, desperate moments, their own flesh and blood. These offerings were not seen as cruelty, but as necessity, tokens of devotion meant to prove that mankind was willing to give up what was dearest in exchange for divine mercy. Each ritual tightened the bond. Each drop of blood etched the agreement deeper into the foundation of the sanctuary. And as long as the offerings were made, the gods remained silent but present, their power pulsing through the stones like a heart beating beneath the earth. The oath was also carved in secrecy, hidden within chambers that only the high priests could enter. It was said that within those innermost sanctums lay inscriptions written in languages not of this world, glyphs that glowed faintly in the dark, alive with the very energy of the pact. These writings declared the conditions: honor the gods without question, never raise man above his station, and never attempt to wield the divine knowledge without permission. The warnings were stern, absolute, and uncompromising. Any breach would not merely dissolve the agreement, it would invite retribution. To the people, the oath was both a blessing and a burden. They lived under its shadow, grateful for the abundance it brought, yet fearful of the consequences should their devotion falter. And over time, as generations passed, the memory of why the oath was sworn began to fade, even as the rituals remained. Tradition replaced understanding, and devotion slowly gave way to formality. What had once been born of awe transformed into routine. And within that shift, the seeds of betrayal began to stir, seeds that would one day shatter the balance and awaken a punishment no one could have imagined. For a time, the covenant held. Seasons obeyed the rhythms of the pact, rains fell upon the fields, and disease seemed to falter under the watch of the gods. The sanctuary stood as the beating heart of this harmony, a living reminder that men and deities walked together in fragile balance. Yet prosperity carries within it the seed of unrest. When bellies are full and storms are calmed, the human spirit begins to hunger for something more. Gratitude weakens into entitlement, and devotion transforms into ambition. It began quietly, as whispers among the ruling class. If the gods had granted wisdom to heal, to build, and to harvest, then surely mankind had earned the right to wield such powers without restraint. Why should mortals forever bow? Why remain chained to eternal obedience when the sanctuary itself pulsed with knowledge waiting to be unlocked? These murmurs grew into defiance, and soon the rituals once performed with trembling reverence were conducted with hollow gestures, more tradition than faith. The incense still burned, the sacrifices were still offered, but the sincerity had drained from their veins. Priests began to alter the rites, seeking shortcuts to divine power. Some attempted to read the hidden glyphs carved in the innermost chambers, glyphs forbidden for mortal eyes. Others experimented with sacred metals and stones believed to contain echoes of divine essence. The knowledge gifted as fragments became the foundation for experiments meant to rival the gods themselves. What had been entrusted as sacred was twisted into a pursuit of dominance. Humanity, once humble before the thunder of the heavens, now dreamed of standing equal to the very forces that had given them life. And then came the betrayal that sealed their fate. Records tell of a night when a ritual was performed, not to honor the gods, but to deceive them. Offerings were withheld, blood was spared, and in its place the people attempted to bind divine power to themselves, to force the sanctuary to yield its secrets without consent. This act was not an accident, it was rebellion. The sanctuary trembled as if alive, the air thickening until torches extinguished and silence consumed the chambers. Witnesses spoke of voices that rose in fury, not from priests or mortals, but from the stone itself, condemning the arrogance that had crossed an irreversible line. What happened next became legend, though fragments remain consistent. A storm descended unlike any seen before. Lightning struck not from the sky, but from within the earth, tearing through the sanctuary's pillars. Crops withered overnight, rivers turned bitter, and the people who had once prospered found themselves cursed by the very powers they tried to command. The pact was shattered, and with it, the trust between gods and men dissolved into ashes. Humanity's sin was not merely disobedience, it was hubris, the belief that mortals could rewrite the terms of eternity, and for that, punishment was inevitable. The day of sealing was unlike any other in human memory, for it was not man who closed the gates, but the gods themselves. The sanctuary, once radiant with offerings and chants, became the stage for divine wrath. The sky grew dark at midday, the sun veiled by clouds that churned with violent hues of crimson and gold, as if heaven itself bled into the horizon. Witnesses spoke of thunder, rolling not in echoes, but in voices, words that condemned, cursed, and decreed the end of communion. What had been sacred was now profaned, and what had been the bridge between worlds became the very wound that divided them. The priests fell to their knees, some begging for forgiveness, others fleeing in terror. Families clutched one another as winds howled through the valley, ripping trees from the earth and scattering rooftops like straw. The sanctuary's great pillars shook, their carvings glowing with a brilliance so blinding that eyes wept blood to behold it. From the ground itself rose fissures that spread like veins of fire, encircling the temple as though the earth had grown claws to seize it. No mortal hand could intervene, no army could defend, for this was a punishment carried out by powers no blade could wound and no shield could resist. Then came the act that ended it all, the sealing. The great bronze gates, carved with depictions of men standing beside gods, slammed shut with a force that cracked the valley floor. Chains of light, not forged by fire but by will, descended from the heavens and bound the entrance, locking it beyond all human strength. Upon the stones appeared marks, sigils blazing with celestial fire, inscriptions that none could read, but all could feel. They pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm, a heartbeat of divinity, warning any who approached that what lay within was no longer for mortal eyes. The people scattered, their voices drowned by the wails of the storm. Some believed the gods themselves had descended into the sanctuary to bury their gifts, to hide their wisdom so that no man could steal it again. Others claimed that what was sealed within was not treasure, but curse, that the sanctuary became a prison, not for mortals, but for something the gods themselves wished never to walk the earth again. Whatever truth lay buried there, one thing was certain: the sanctuary had become forbidden ground, a monument not of glory, but of shame. When the skies finally cleared, silence replaced the chaos. The valley stood scarred, blackened by fire and ash, and in the center loomed the sanctuary, its gates locked, its walls humming faintly like the echo of a scream swallowed by stone. No bird dared land upon it, no roots pierced its foundation. Time began its work, covering the ruins with dust and moss, but the marks of sealing never faded. They glowed faintly even centuries later, a reminder etched into the world itself that men had once stood before gods, broken their pact, and paid the price. The sealing of the sanctuary was only the beginning. The gods, in their fury, did not stop at closing the gates. They unleashed punishment that would scar humanity for generations. The people who had once walked in abundance awoke to a land stripped bare of blessings. Rains that once fell in perfect rhythm vanished, leaving fields cracked and barren under a merciless sun. Rivers that once sparkled with life turned to mud, and fish rotted upon their banks as if poisoned by unseen hands. The air grew heavy, carrying sickness in its breath, and soon the sound of mourning replaced the hymns that had once risen from the valley. But the punishment went deeper than hunger and thirst. It reached into the very spirit of the people. Families grew divided, suspicions spreading like wildfire as neighbors turned against each other, each blaming the other for the wrath that had descended. Trust dissolved, and bonds of kinship that had lasted for centuries shattered under the weight of fear. The gods had not merely struck the land, they had struck the human heart. Where once there had been unity under the covenant, there was now discord and betrayal. What was once a proud people became scattered tribes, each clutching fragments of a broken past. Legends say that children were born marked, their eyes clouded, their bodies frail, as though cursed from birth. Some bore strange signs on their skin, symbols that mirrored the inscriptions on the sealed sanctuary itself. Elders whispered that these children were living reminders, vessels of divine warning meant to ensure no one forgot the price of arrogance. Some were revered, others feared, but all carried the weight of a punishment that transcended generations. There were also plagues that defied explanation. Crops that grew one season turned to ash the next. Livestock gave birth to stillborn calves, and birds fell from the sky mid-flight. Storms would erupt without warning, tearing through villages, while entire harvests vanished overnight, devoured by swarms of locusts so vast they blotted out the sun. Each calamity seemed tailored not by nature, but by intention, as though the gods themselves sculpted suffering with precision. The punishment was not blind, it was deliberate, a reminder carved into every season that the covenant had been broken. And perhaps most chilling of all was the silence. The voices of the gods, once heard through storms and visions, fell quiet. No priest could summon them, no offering stirred them, no ritual reopened the bridge. Humanity was abandoned, left to wander in darkness, aware only of the void where divine presence had once been. That silence was itself a punishment, more dreadful than famine or plague, for it told humanity that they were alone, stripped not only of favor, but of meaning. The sanctuary, glowing faintly in the distance, stood as the eternal witness to this divine retribution. Its locked gates became the symbol of humanity's greatest mistake, a mistake not easily forgiven nor easily forgotten. And as centuries passed, the punishment was no longer remembered as an event, but as a curse etched into the bloodline of mankind. Centuries may have buried the sanctuary under soil, moss, and silence, yet the echoes of its curse have never faded. Travelers who stray too close to its ruins often report sensations that defy reason. A sudden drop in temperature, the weight of unseen eyes pressing upon their shoulders, or whispers carried on the wind, though no mouth utters them. The land surrounding the sanctuary is different. Trees grow twisted, their branches clawing at the sky, and animals avoid the place as if guided by instinct older than memory. Even the bravest of hunters will not sleep within sight of its broken pillars, for they claim the night there does not belong to men. Stories persist of wanderers who vanished entirely after daring to step across the sanctuary's threshold. Some were seasoned explorers, scholars searching for lost truths. Others were peasants with no knowledge of the past, yet all share the same fate. Weeks or months later, their belongings are found scattered at the edge of the ruins, but their bodies are never recovered. Elders warn that these souls were claimed by the Pact itself, drawn into the sanctuary's silence as payment for trespassing on ground the gods had forbidden. Whether myth or truth, the fear remains, enough to keep most away. Archaeologists in more recent centuries have approached the site with cautious fascination. They bring tools of science and reason, convinced that superstition will yield to measurement. Yet even they leave unsettled. Instruments fail inexplicably, compasses spin wildly, and photographs emerge blurred, as though reality itself resists being captured. Some researchers confess to vivid dreams after visiting, visions of fire, floods, and voices repeating words they cannot understand. A few have abandoned their studies entirely, claiming they awoke with markings on their skin that faded only after leaving the valley. The sanctuary also bleeds into local folklore, shaping the lives of those who dwell nearby. Children are taught to never utter the names of gods aloud after sunset, lest they awaken echoes of the ancient pact. Farmers refuse to plant within sight of the ruins, believing the soil is poisoned not by minerals, but by memory. Festivals are held in surrounding villages, not to celebrate, but to appease. Offerings of grain and wine left at crossroads in hopes the curse will not drift beyond the sanctuary's shadow. For these people, the past is not history. It is a living presence, as real as the storms that sweep through their valleys. And yet, despite the fear, curiosity lingers. Each generation produces a handful willing to test the forbidden, convinced that within those sealed walls lies not punishment, but knowledge. They believe the sanctuary hides secrets about humanity's origin, power lost when the covenant was shattered. To them, the echoes are not warnings but invitations, and so even now footsteps continue to approach its gates, reminding the world that although gods may punish, men will always seek what has been denied. For centuries, the sanctuary remained sealed, its secrets silenced behind gates no hand could move. Yet time, though it erodes stone and swallows empires, also reveals what was meant to be forgotten. Earthquakes cracked the valley floor, rains washed away layers of soil, and slowly, fragments of the past began to surface. Archaeologists and wanderers alike uncovered shards of tablets, fragments of walls carved with strange glyphs, and relics that shimmered faintly, even in the dark. Each discovery seemed to pulse with a warning, as though the artifacts themselves carried the memory of voices long silenced. Among the most startling finds were inscriptions hidden deep in collapsed corridors near the sanctuary's edge. These carvings spoke not of worship or gratitude, but of betrayal and consequence. They described in fractured detail the covenant itself, gods and men bound by oath, prosperity given in exchange for obedience. But buried within those words lay a prophecy darker than any had imagined. Should the oath be broken, the gods would not only withdraw their favor, but would bind a punishment so enduring that it would echo into the ages. "The sanctuary shall be sealed," one inscription declared, "and within it shall remain the shadow of wrath, waiting for those who dare awaken it again." Scholars debated whether these words were literal or symbolic, but others insisted they were warnings not of what had happened, but of what was yet to come. Some fragments suggested that the sealing was not merely to lock humanity out, but to lock something else in. "Beneath the stones sleeps the divine fire," one tablet read, "and should mortal hands release it, the earth itself will mourn." The thought that the sanctuary could be less a tomb and more a prison unsettled even the most skeptical minds. Legends told by nearby villagers seemed to echo these revelations. They spoke of dreams in which the sanctuary's gates opened in silence, releasing shadows that walked not as men, but as storms. Others claimed to hear the names of forgotten gods whispered in their sleep, commanding them to remember the pact. These dreams often coincided with archaeological digs, as if each intrusion into the sanctuary's soil stirred the remnants of divine memory. The most chilling revelation came with a set of stone tablets unearthed in the 20th century. Their glyphs, painstakingly translated, contained a direct message. "He who enters to claim what was lost shall inherit not wisdom, but ruin, for the gods do not forget, and the punishment is eternal." This single inscription shook the community of scholars, some abandoning their work, others more determined than ever to break the seal. For if the punishment was eternal, then perhaps so too was the power hidden behind those gates. The sanctuary, once a monument of silence, now speaks again through its fragments, and what it says is not simply a story of the past, but a warning for the present. The hidden revelation is clear. The punishment was not confined to history. It is alive, waiting, and it promises to awaken if humanity dares to repeat its sin. The story of the sanctuary is not merely a tale of ruins and forgotten gods. It is a mirror held up to humanity itself. The Pact, born in reverence and broken in arrogance, reflects an ancient truth, that the human spirit, restless and ambitious, is forever caught between devotion and rebellion. When the gods demanded humility, it was not to strip men of freedom, but to remind them of balance. And yet balance is the one thing humanity struggles to preserve. What began as a covenant of unity became a lesson in hubris, a reminder that prosperity without restraint often sows the seeds of destruction. To reflect on the Pact is to ask whether humanity ever truly learns from its past. The inscriptions warn not only of punishment, but of memory, the idea that consequences outlast those who commit the sin. If an ancient people could rise under divine favor and fall under divine wrath, what does that say about us now? Are we any different, or do we walk the same path, repeating the same mistakes beneath new skies? The sanctuary may be silent, but its story resounds as prophecy, not just history. Some philosophers argue that the Pact was never about gods and men, but about power itself. The gods symbolize forces beyond human control, nature, time, destiny, and the Pact was humanity's attempt to coexist with those forces rather than dominate them. When men tried to claim power as their own, they ruptured not only their bond with the divine, but with the very order of existence. In that light, the punishment was not vengeance, but consequence, a natural response to imbalance, as inevitable as the collapse of a structure whose foundation has cracked. Yet the sanctuary complicates this reflection. If it truly holds something sealed within, whether wisdom or wrath, then perhaps the gods feared not only human betrayal, but the very power they had shared. Was the punishment meant to humble mankind, or to protect them from a force they were never meant to touch? The ambiguity leaves us unsettled, caught between awe and dread. To open the gates might mean reclaiming lost truths, but it could also mean unleashing a punishment meant to endure until the end of time. Ultimately, the Pact forces us to confront our own nature. We crave knowledge, even when it burns us. We seek control, even when it destroys us. And perhaps that is why the story endures, not as a relic of a forgotten age, but as a living warning. The sanctuary does not simply tell us what happened, it asks us what will happen if we dare to forget. To reflect on the Pact is to realize that the divine punishment was not only theirs, it is ours, waiting at the edges of our ambition, ready to descend again if we choose the same path. The sanctuary remains sealed, its gates locked by forces no mortal hand can unbind. Moss covers the stone, roots creep along its walls, and storms roll above it as if the sky itself remembers what lies beneath. Yet, despite centuries of silence, it is not forgotten. Its presence lingers like a heartbeat beneath the earth, subtle but undeniable, reminding all who draw near that history has not ended. It waits. The divine punishment was not simply a moment in the past, but a shadow cast across time, ready to awaken if men once again defy what they cannot control. Legends claim the sanctuary still hums at night, a vibration that travels through the soil and into the bones of those who listen. Some say it is the echo of the gods themselves, a warning meant to keep humanity humble. Others believe it is the imprisoned power struggling to break free, its wrath only temporarily restrained by chains of light. Whatever the truth, the effect is the same. The sanctuary does not merely exist, it watches, and in its silence it demands that we remember the Pact, not as myth, but as a truth etched into the very fabric of the earth. The question that haunts us now is whether humanity has truly changed. We stand in an age of machines and endless knowledge, where men reach for the stars and claim mastery over the elements. But is this ambition so different from the ancient hunger that led to betrayal? The gods may no longer walk among us in thunder and flame, but the forces they represent, nature, destiny, power, remain as untamable as ever. The sanctuary whispers that the line between reverence and arrogance is thin, and once crossed, the consequence is inevitable. Imagine the moment the gates are forced open, whether by accident or design. What would emerge? Would it be divine wisdom, granting humanity the chance to transcend its limits, or divine wrath, flooding the world with the punishment once endured by our ancestors? The uncertainty is the very essence of the sanctuary's warning. It does not simply tell us to fear, it tells us to choose. To stand at the threshold of forbidden knowledge is to confront not the gods, but ourselves. As the wind moves through the valley and the ruins loom in silence, one truth becomes clear. The sanctuary is not just a relic of the past, it is a prophecy written in stone, a reminder that the balance between men and gods was broken once and could be broken again. The divine punishment has not ended, it sleeps, waiting, hidden in the cracks of time. And perhaps the greatest terror of all is not that the sanctuary will one day be opened, but that humanity, in its endless hunger, will be the one to open it.